So, Spinel. I know I've been branding my channel as very horror themed lately, and while that is one of my biggest passions, even greater than that is my passion for animation. I have been madly in love with this medium of film since the earliest years of my life, and it's now what I've chosen to major in. As an animator, I find that Spinel embodies everything that I love about the art form. She is such a joy to watch, and I've been trying to capture that essence of hers in my own art for years now. Her design serves as a love letter to the early days of animation and expands upon the rubber hose style in the best way possible. There is so much to analyze and appreciate about her character that I feel the need to gush about it in depth. I've been a fan of Steven Universe since elementary school, but nothing has strengthened my passion as much as Steven Universe the movie. Ever since that film came out, Spinel has been my all-time favorite character for the past 5 years? Oh god. I'll be honest, after the final season concluded, I was ready for this show to be over. And when I heard the movie announcement, I had no idea what the next worst threat could possibly be. In previous seasons, we had the introduction of invading homeworld gems like Peridot and Jasper. Jasper being a soldier who helped hold the crystal gems and a random war victim hostage, and Peridot, a scientist sent to stamp out any remaining rebels while monitoring the ongoing gem experiments, which involved fusing the remains of fallen soldiers and bringing them back to live as horribly deformed, faceless monstrosities, one of which was a living mass grave so enormous that if it were to reform, it would explode the planet. And sometime later, we had the threat of the Diamond showing up, the fascist dictators of Homeworld, responsible for countless planetary genocides and the deaths of many, many gems on both sides of the war. So when Season 5 wrapped up and all of those war crimes had been resolved, I guess, there's suddenly this new gem who's allegedly going to be Steven's greatest challenge yet. Actual quote, by the way. And you know what that threat was? That's right, a clown. A literal, actual, singular jester. This is our biggest threat now. So, yeah, you can see why I wasn't really sold on the premise yet. It also didn't help that I was not a fan of clowns back then, but now my feelings are the exact opposite because of her. Anyway, my expectations were low. Spinel looked a bit too weird for me, but then I watched the movie and she became my favorite thing ever. If you haven't seen Steven Universe or the movie, I don't know what you're doing here, but to recap, spoiler warning of course, Spinel is the villain of Steven Universe the movie. It takes place 2 years after the main series, where all of the show's problems had already been resolved. Steven is living out his happily ever after until Spinel shows up, threatening to poison the Earth with a device called the Injector, and wiping his friend's memories with another device called the Rejuvenator. Steven gets hit by the Rejuvenator as well, but instead of losing his memories, he loses the powers that he's been learning to control over the past few years. He spends most of the movie trying to jog his friend's memories and the memories of Spinel so she can hopefully come back and be convinced to turn off the injector. The problem is, nobody other than Pearl knows who Spinel is, and even Pearl hasn't seen this gem in over 6,000 years. As Spinel's memories start to come back, we learn that she was once the playmate of his mother, Pink Diamond. Pink Diamond was always seen as the more childish diamond of the four, so she was given an equally childish jester. But as the years went by, Pink started to outgrow her. Pink didn't want to take Spinel to Earth with her, so she tricked Spinel into playing a game where she was told to stand perfectly still until she returned. Thousands of years went by before Spinel got Steven's transmission and realized that Pink had already lived a full life and died without her. Her attack on the planet that Pink never took her to was a vain attempt to get back at her and everything she held dear after years of neglect. Once Spinel gets her memories back, she knows what she's doing is wrong and initially agrees to turn off the injector until she's once again hit with the tender feeling of betrayal when she begins to suspect that all of Steven's compassion was just an act to get her to help him. The rest of the movie shows her wrestling with the pain and anger she feels while Steven tries to convince her to change. By the end, she wants to start over and be a good friend, but she's too ashamed to try again with Steven, so he suggests that she makes friends with the other diamonds. They take her home to their palace, all is well, and the movie is over. So that's the rundown, and that's what you're going to have to sit through for the rest of this video. I'm going to cover everything I could possibly gather about Spinel from the past 5 years of hyperfixating on her. It's basically going to be a bunch of facts and trivia with my own thoughts and speculations sprinkled in. If you're not interested in my neurodivergent ramblings, you're free to click away at any time. If you are a friend of mine, that does not apply to you. You don't have that option. First, I'm going to be covering auditory aspects such as sound, music, and voice acting, then visuals like character design and animation, then character analysis and plot relevance, until we get to the final segment where I give my own opinions on how I think the characters should be used in any future installments. Before we get into it, I want to promote my ongoing analog horror series, MOTLEY'S Mathhouse. If you like Spinel, there's a chance you might like this, because it wouldn't have existed at all if she didn't get me into jesters. I've been working on this project since 2022, and I've released 2 episodes on YouTube already, with some bonus content and a website as well. We're in the process of making episode 3 and could really use some support to finish the full season. Support our series by watching it and sharing it around. The videos are monetized, so every view counts, but we also have a Ko-fi for more direct donations. If you like horror, mystery, and 2000s nostalgia, then this is the show for you. Check out MOTLEY'S Mathhouse with the link on screen or down below. Thanks for listening, and now we'll get on with the video. The first thing to cover is sound design, and that can be summarized pretty quickly. I just like the sound effects they use for Spinel. It's a lot of squeaking and rubbery sounds when she moves or stretches, all very fitting for an elastic cartoon character. Occasionally, she'll make a bit of a snap or rattling sound, usually coming from her neck or eyes. In particular, I like the scene in the episode Homeworld Bound, where you can hear a snap come from her as she says,
"I was just a wreck back then, but I am so much better now."
I think this really supports the idea of her having a screw loose in her head somewhere. The next thing is music. For Spinel in particular, I'm going to talk about the songs Other Friends, Disobedient, Drift Away, and Found. Other Friends is the first song that we hear from Spinel to introduce her, and it's also the first true villain song that the crew had ever composed for the series, not just a song that happened to be sung by a villain. It serves its purpose well, giving us the overall vibe of her character and hinting at her backstory while leaving a lot unexplained for later. The crew described the song as being of the electro swing genre, which is incredibly fitting for a 1920s themed character such as herself, though I feel it could have done more to express this. I do hear it, especially when listening to the instruments alone, but it also tries to fit with the rest of the Steven Universe soundtrack when I'd rather it fully commit to the swing style. One choice I do like about the instruments is the inclusion of the mellotron, which would become prominent in all of Spinel's music. Most gems are represented by synthetic instruments because they themselves are inorganic beings, unlike the life forms on Earth. Since Spinel's aesthetic is based on cartoons of the early 20th century, the best compromise for giving her a dated sound while remaining electronic is to incorporate the vintage mellotron. The tapes used to produce the sound of a mellotron can become warped and distorted, perfectly reflecting Spinel as something old, broken, and obsolete. The instruments sound unsteady and unnerving, just as Spinel herself is unstable and keeping the audience on edge. The next song, Disobedient, does not initially seem to be about Spinel, but I wanted to make a case for it. It's performed by the character Sadie Miller as she sings about her old, boring life working at the Big Donut, but it has a second meaning as the characters use it to try to get Pearl's memories back. It doesn't end up working on Pearl, but it was meant to remind her of the past she shared with Rose as a rebel soldier. I'd argue that despite the characters trying to make it about Pearl, it's actually about Spinel due to its overall message and these few lyrics in particular.
I've been good, sir, so very, very good for what? And I've given you every single thing I've got. It's feeling strange, man. This whole arrangement is gonna end with me totally deranged. When I think about all the wasted time I spent, I don't wanna be disobedient. I should awake, wondering where my summer went. I don't wanna be disobedient, disobedient, disobedient.
There's a lot of language about servantship, obviously in reference to Pearl as Pink Diamond's servant, but Spinel was also a gem designed to serve Pink. I think the lyrics are more suitable for Spinel because while Pearl did listen to Rose's command to go be her own person, she never resented serving her, while the song seems to express a more negative opinion of it, making it out to be a big waste of time. In Spinel's case, her loyalty to Pink only ever brought her suffering, and that realization is what caused her to become a villain. I don't want to play this song due to copyright, but go listen to it, read the lyrics, and tell me what you think. The next song is Drift Away, and I think we should all show Rebecca some appreciation for managing to write the same song twice. For context, the inspiration for Spinel came from a specific incident in the showrunner's past when she left a plush rabbit outside in a garden and forgot about it. When she found the rabbit again, she saw that it had been bleached and permanently damaged by the sun. Rebecca claims that this was the first moment she began to process how things go on and change without you, and she felt guilty for how careless she was with a toy that she thought she loved. When she was writing the song Everything Stays for Adventure Time, it came directly from this incident with the rabbit, and as she started to make the villain for her own movie, she found herself once again writing about the same thing. Obviously, she couldn't reuse the song, so she basically had to write it twice. I also find it very similar to the song When She Loved Me from Toy Story 2, but I've never heard commentary from the creators that would confirm if this was any source of inspiration. Is it a coincidence that both movies happen to have a tragic song halfway through about the heartbreak of a red-haired plaything forgotten by an owner who long since outgrew her? Maybe, but I can't ignore the striking similarities. As obsessed as I am with the Steven Universe movie, I will say the Toy Story song is a much more successful tearjerker. The last song I'll talk about here is Found. Found is the song that quickly precedes Drift Away once Spinel gets her memories back. It is a bittersweet duet between Steven and Spinel, encapsulating their dynamic of the movie. On the one hand, there's Steven, who is urgently trying to win Spinel over as fast as possible so he can save his planet, but he doesn't want to completely ignore the trauma she's dealing with. He's trying his best to reassure her that things are going to work out and that she can have a life again, but there's a bit of miscommunication between the two. In her very lonely and desperate state, Spinel misinterprets the message of his song. While he sings that one day she'll find a caring friend who loves her, she's led to believe that Steven is the one he's singing about and that he will be her friend. It fills her with hope for the moment, but we can tell that she's looking into things much more than Steven is, and she's only setting herself up for more heartbreak. The visuals do a lot to support this idea as well, but that's a conversation for later. Okay, the last part of this audio segment is voice acting. Spinel is played by the Broadway actress Sarah Stiles. She didn't know anything about Steven Universe when she signed on, but she was so won over by the song Drift Away that she felt it was her duty to portray the character. It was only after she got the part that she realized Spinel was actually the main antagonist of the film. Despite that late realization, she did an amazing job performing the full range of Spinel's personality. Playing Spinel must have been no easy task, since she really does show a whole rainbow of emotions. She's simultaneously very cute and goofy, but can switch to angry and menacing on a whim. Even her laugh would vary between scenes.
Then I guess you won't mind if I do it again. Wow!
Sarah Stiles really was a perfect choice for the character and proved her capabilities as an actress. I do wish we'd see more of her in the future, but it doesn't seem like the movie changed much of what she's been up to. I did see her pop up in Hazbin Hotel, as what I can only assume was just one big Spinel reference, but I'd like to see her as more than just a one-off side character. Now that we've covered the audio, let's get on with the visuals, starting with character design. I love everything about Spinel's character design, as each element plays perfectly into the other. When we first see her, Spinel's design perfectly conveys what her job was and who she belonged to, even before the audience finds out. The most obvious connection to Pink Diamond is simply that Spinel is also the color pink, but beyond that you can see that she's a jester and therefore the entertainer of royalty, in this case, the diamonds. Jesters are already an outdated concept, but to further cement the idea of her being old and obsolete, she takes inspiration from vintage cartoons. On top of that, they make use of the rubber hose art style by then giving her the power of elasticity, playing into the zany visuals of old cartoons and making her more entertaining as a silly little jester. And on top of all that, we have the fact that jesters and old cartoons are a little creepy, and that uncomfortable feeling helps establish Spinel as a threat. Getting more specific about the details in her designs, I'll go over both of her forms in the movie. In Spinel's first design, she has soft rounded edges with big black pie-cut eyes and lashes, a perfect smile, round cartoon shoes, gloves, and two heart-shaped pigtails resembling Mickey Mouse ears. When she reforms, her cute little pigtails have been undone into long, spiky strands. Her clothes have become sharper, her smile is toothier, exposing her gums. Her face wrinkles when she emotes, her pupils narrow to reveal piercing red irises, and black streaks run down her face like mascara, complemented by the redness under her eyes that make it seem as though she had just finished crying. You can see between the two designs that she starts out with a literal and metaphorical light in her eyes that disappears when she reforms. I also love how subtly expressive her hair can be. I'd actually like to see more of it. Due to the fact that she's based on Mickey Mouse and a toy rabbit, I can't help but see them as ears. Another quick side note on the hair, not only does it resemble Mickey Mouse, but it also plays with perspective in the same way. Both Mickey's ears and Spinel's hair retain the same shape, no matter the profile you view them from. Spinel's reformed look is very imperfect as her faults have become much more visible. Though these traits are meant to be ugly in a way, I find Rebecca's sketches of her to be rather beautiful. Rebecca has always had a knack for conveying authentic, raw emotion in such an elegant way. Still, I do wonder what Spinel must think of herself now, looking in the mirror and seeing the innocence physically stripped away from her form. Whether or not it was a conscious choice, she did do this to herself, and she knows she will never truly be the same innocent gem again. Does Spinel look at those black scars she's branded herself with and think, I've ruined myself? Part of her conflict in the movie is that she believes she's only capable of changing for the worse. But as Rebecca explained in her interview about the plush rabbit,
it wasn't worse either. It was fine. It was just different. It had just become different. There was nothing wrong with it having this light belly because of the sun. It was just a different thing now.
Another thing I'd like to note about her appearance is her gemstone. When you look at it compared to the crystal gems, you can see that her gemstone is very large for her proportions. I think this choice serves two purposes. One, that despite her small, skinny appearance, she has a lot of excess mass stored in her gemstone, which allows her to stretch so drastically with ease. And two, it shows that she has a big heart. She was made to be affectionate, and she has a lot of love in her heart that she's desperate to give. Getting more into the animation, Spinel has some of the most kinetic and entertaining movements of any character in the entire show. She's insanely overpowered for such a scrawny villain, yet it's totally believable that she could bounce and slide around like that. Nothing she does looks realistic at all, but it has such a sense of weight and energy that I believe it anyway. Also, here's a fun fact. Spinels are an 8 on the Mohs hardness scale of gems, not too far from a diamond, which is a 10. I am not sure if it was intentional, but it provides yet another plausible reason as to why a gem who was never made for fighting could be such a formidable opponent. She was likely the replacement that came after Pink broke her first pearl volleyball, and since pearls are a 2.5 on the Mohs scale, it seems that the diamonds wanted to give her a gem that was more durable. Getting back on track, there's some specific animation choices that do a great job of expressing her emotions and personality, such as her limbs deflating into noodles when she's sad, or her eyes bouncing loose in their sockets. Her elasticity directly supports her cartoon aesthetic, making those visual gags possible and justifying her ability to contort herself for either a silly or menacing effect. Her getting cut in half with the rejuvenator and smiling and cackling as her face slides off is such a perfectly twisted indicator of how lost she is in her madness. And later in the film, when she regains that happy spring in her step, I adore the way she bounces and the repetitive, idle animation of an old cartoon. While I associate her more with Western cartoons, she does take inspiration from some anime and video games. One of my favorite shots of her is during Drift Away, when she's transforming into her present self, and she whips her head back as her hair unravels into those long, spiky strands. It seems to take inspiration from Sailor Moon, which is certainly not a product of the early 20th century, but it looks beautiful nonetheless. I also caught some Sonic references in the episode Homeward Bound, and again, it's a bit modern, but the zaniness is perfectly in line with her character, though one of those shots may or may not be a Roadrunner reference. Two small things to note about the props and backgrounds. When she's standing in the garden during Drift Away, the blue flowers she stands next to are actually forget-me-nots. And later in the movie, the top of the injector is shown to be a giant heart, similar to her own, representing how she now has a heart full of poison. Despite the book not focusing on her, if you own a copy of The Tale of Stephen, you can actually see Spinel's silhouette in the garden. Moving on to the character analysis and Spinel's plot relevance, let's start with discussing the major themes of the movie. Rebecca Sugar explained that the main idea of the movie had always stemmed from the prompt: what would happen if the crystal gems were reverted to factory settings, with Spinel and the injector being tacked on later as an additional threat. She developed the main plot years earlier when her phone's memory was wiped, and she wondered what that would mean for the gems when their emotional growth was so integral to the show. Couple that with the memory of her leaving a toy in the garden, and you've got yourself a story about change. Change and the reluctance to accept it is one of the main themes of the movie. Spinel serves as a foil to Stephen as they both try to cope with change through very different methods. When the movie begins, Stephen's life is in a great place, and once things start going south, his immediate instinct is to fix the problem as quickly as possible, to return to his happily ever after. But for Spinel, her life is already in the worst place it could possibly be, and knowing there's nothing she can do to turn back time, she just wants to spread her hurt as far as possible. Neither of them are able to accept this change, and while Stephen's solution is far less destructive, seeing Spinel's behavior shows him the kind of path he could go down if he can't accept the fact that life is ever changing, and there's little you can do to control your circumstances. Just only your reaction to them. He understands this by the end of the film, stating that there's no such thing as a happily ever after, and that there will always be more work to do. But despite him understanding that now, in the epilogue series to come after the movie, Steven Universe Future, he continues to struggle finding his place in the world. In the episode Homeworld Bound, we see that the roles are reversed as Steven is now struggling to control his anger and is terrified that he's going to be abandoned by his loved ones when they all move on in life. Meanwhile, Spinel seems to be living it up with the diamonds, perfectly content in life and seemingly cured of her issues. I don't buy that she's actually fixed, but I find the juxtaposition interesting. The episode doesn't address it much, but Steven has gone on saying that he feels like his friends are drifting away, and here comes the perfect opportunity to discuss those feelings with the character who literally had a musical number on that issue.
Everyone moves on to bigger and better things and new and exciting places. Well, except for me, I'll still be right here.
Your magic's all about your feelings, right? I don't know, it just seems like you're sad about all your friends drifting away.
Connie, I'm sorry. I don't want to hold you back.
I don't mind.
You've got cram school, new friends, you're going places, and I'm happy for you. But I feel like you're drifting away from me.
Getting back to the movie, Spinel brings an interesting piece of symbolism to the table with her injector. The injector is a physical embodiment of the toxic personality she has developed, spewing poison out as far and wide as she can manage. Once the drill has emptied all of its poison in a devastating flood, she finds herself standing at the top of it with nothing more to do. Though she remains violent and stubborn, she's beginning to realize that without a way to spread the poison in her heart, she's the one stuck living with it. Before her fight with Steven begins, we see that the top of the injector that they stand on is a heart-shaped gem similar to her own, further demonstrating how the battle that ensues is one going on within herself. She knows that there's no one left to blame, but to accept that she's playing a part in her own misery is just too much to bear. She also knows that hurting Steven is not making her any happier. She still feels betrayed by him, and that vengeful side of her wants him to burn for it, but deep down, she knows she has a fondness for him that makes her feel weak and vulnerable. She gives up fighting when she can finally admit to herself that what she's doing is irrational and counterproductive to her desire for friendship. Now, jumping back to an earlier scene, here's the part where I start talking about found again, so bear with me as I try to squeeze this into the segment. As Spinel reforms in the garden, thousands of years' worth of suffering come back to her in an instant, leaving her overwhelmed and depressed. She wants to keep being angry, but just doesn't have the motivation anymore. Steven takes this opportunity to reach out to her, and thus the duet begins, which I will now be discussing the visuals of. When the song begins, Spinel is at her lowest and not initially receptive to his attempts to cheer her up. He offers her a hand, which she hesitantly takes it as he begins to lift her up, physically and emotionally. She joins in his duet, and her lyrics are repeated in the first person, almost like affirmations. She seems shy and unsure, physically positioned to be shorter than he is. She's starting to warm up to him, and as she does, there's an up-close shot of their hands intertwined. Steven lets go of her hand and turns around while Spinel's hand remains outstretched, still reaching out for his. This is the first compassionate touch of another person that she's felt in a very long time, and you can see she wants it back. Steven begins to walk away, leading her, and she slowly takes the steps to follow him. He gives her a reassuring glance back, telling her to join him as he walks ahead, and she has some catching up to do as the distance between them grows. He leads her to the warp pad and extends a hand for her to hold as she slowly climbs the steps. Once again, The staging indicates that she's looking up to him until she takes his hand and they stand side by side, seemingly on equal ground. It appears they've come to an agreement now, and that the situation is understood, but not quite. As they warp back, she gives him a genuine smile for the first time. She's been completely won over, and as she watches him run away, though her smile does falter for a second, when he turns around to check on her, she trusts that he won't leave her behind. She concludes the song with new lyrics of her own, claiming that right here, right now, she already feels found. But that was not the message he intended. She holds her heart and sheds a tear of joy before chasing after him. This moment, which was surely one of the happiest in her life, unfortunately opened the door to a deeply tragic misunderstanding between the two. Throughout the song, Steven is consistently walking away, turning around, and keeping his distance, clearly more detached, while she remains attentive the entire time. To Steven, this is just the routine now. This is how he's dealt with every other villain, but Spinel doesn't know this and thinks that this is something special. She is shy and embarrassed to return, but after that song, she's very friendly and trusting of Steven. She hovers over him, just as touchy-feely as she was when she was reset, but now holding on to him more for a sense of comfort. She's charmed by him up until the point when she realizes that winning her over was just a step in his plan to fix the bigger problem. As soon as the injector isn't a threat anymore, he walks off just like he did in the duet, now talking about his plans to fix Garnet next, with Spinel no longer serving any purpose. It's devastating for Spinel, but Steven can't really be blamed for this. He just wants his life back, and he's trying to run through the motions, fixing another disaster like he's done so many times before. Another thing that probably isn't helping her disproportionate attachment is her own programming. Not only is she getting over Pink Diamond, whose gem now belongs to Steven, but when she was reset, he was the one she immediately imprinted on. Every part of her being was designed for friendship, and she's been hardwired to seek it from one specific person. Even after she got her memories back, I doubt she could shake the feelings programmed into her. Everything in her head was convincing her that he was it. He was going to be the new Pink for her, and that just wasn't the case. She's left in a painful position, not knowing what to do when the people she was made for don't seem to want her at all. From Spinel's perspective, in her reset form, she was having a fun day out with Steven and his friends, hitting the town, trying food for the first time, riding a train, and going to a concert. When she's worn thin from the fight, she says,
At least you found me entertaining. You actually liked me, didn't you?
And I think, unfortunately for her, that's not true. She's stuck with all these fond memories and fuzzy feelings that just weren't mutual. After the injector explodes, Steven sets Spinel down and promises to come back for her while he runs over to meet with his friends. He and Connie are the first to embrace and check on each other. Spinel stares on from a distance with such longing in her eyes. She watches him reconnect with each of his loved ones, and you can see how desperately she yearns to be a part of that life. She walks away, feeling ashamed of all the damage she caused and feeling foolish for thinking she ever had a semblance of what Steven does with the rest of his friends. The Diamonds make a last-second appearance, and they wind up taking her in, which is nice and all, but this leads me to the epilogue series and the episode Homeworld Bound. Throughout Steven Universe Future, Steven's mental health has been on a rapid decline, becoming so desperate and afraid of himself that he runs away and flees to Homeworld, seeking help from the Diamonds, literally the last people he'd ever want to see. As soon as he arrives, Spinel spots him from across the room and, in the goofiest way imaginable, she rushes over to greet him. She's clearly overjoyed to see him again, seeing this as an opportunity to shoot her shot and maybe be a friend for real this time. This is yet another misunderstanding on her end, because she knows that he's looking for help, but she has absolutely no idea how far Steven has spiraled at this point. She feels so thankful for all that he did for her that she's desperate to return the favor, but she has no idea what it is that he needs. Truthfully, he didn't even want to see her. He came for the diamonds, and she's just a distraction tagging along. He only asks her specifically for help when all else fails, but her admiration for him quickly gets in the way of her judgment, and she thinks singing his own song back to him will be helpful. Now, from Spinel's perspective, the song Change is a thing that pushed her to turn her life around. So, of course, she's doing this to express her gratitude and to give him the best advice she knows, which already came from him. But from his perspective, this just looks really silly and condescending. It's only when she and the diamonds follow him to Earth that the urgency of his situation dawns upon her. She realizes that this is not the opportunity she thought it was, and she follows along with the rest of his friends to bring him back before presumably returning to the palace, leaving him alone. I think this was pretty mature of her, and this is just how reality is, but it's sad to see that she's been waiting for a chance to try again, and it seems like that perfect moment is never coming. Also, to whoever decided to write that line in Homeworld Bound where White Diamond tells her to step outside and Spinel says,
Okay, don't take too long.
"You're messed up. You know that, right? That was evil." Okay, one more thing to mention now in post. I did not say much about Spinel's scythe because, frankly, outside of looking cool, I don't think it has many connections to her personally. At least not in the way that the injector does. As I explained, before Spinel came around, the sole concept of the movie was just the memory wipe. The idea behind this device was around long before her, and throughout the movie, it's mostly just a catalyst for conflict. However, there are a few things I could say about it. It kickstarts the theme of the movie by making Steven confront who he and his friends would be if they never learned to grow and change. When the Rejuvenator gets knocked out of his pocket and Spinel sees that he's been carrying it, that shows how Steven's still holding on to the idea of keeping things the same as they were. When he finally snaps it in half towards the end, that is the moment when he chooses to accept change and move forward with it. Since Steven and Spinel's conflict both involve this acceptance, I do see how it relates to her in that way, but I've always seen it as more than just her. The only other connections I could make is that the concept artist said that they attempted to hide some heart shapes in its design, and if I'm really stretching things here, I guess it's long and thin like she is. I don't think it matters too much how it's connected to her, it just looks cool, and the animation of her twirling it around was pretty awesome. So yeah, it's sort of complimentary to her design, but I didn't have as much to say on it. So with all that being said about her character and everything she did, she's really not that important to the plot at all. Like, genuinely, if you deleted the movie, very little would change for the overarching storyline, and while I find that disappointing, I'm not exactly surprised. Her first appearance came from a TV movie that released only after the end of the main series, and the channel really can't expect every casual viewer to go watch the film to understand what's happening in the epilogue. However, it's not like she feels out of place for this story. She fits in pretty well, and given the ripple effect Pink Diamond had caused, it doesn't seem improbable for a second that something like this could happen. It's just that she came in far too late to ever become something significant. The movie doesn't disrupt the plot at all, but it's probably better to view it as a standalone entity. Despite the brevity of her appearance, Spinel is a delightful, well-developed character, a part of a fun musical movie for both fans of the series and strangers to it. Okay, on to the last part of the video. I'm going to give my opinions on what more I would want to see with the character. I'm not sure if Steven Universe is ever coming back, but if it does and they don't do more with her, I'm going to be eternally disappointed.
First of all, why was she not on stage at the end? Genuinely, they put characters up there who were barely involved, like Greg, and even more so Connie, who was only around for the very beginning and end of the film, but no Spinel? She's the main antagonist. This was her movie. Why isn't she up there? I know that the focus is that he's there with his friends and his family, but really? What stage play have you gone to that doesn't allow the main villain to take a bow at the end? Can she swoop in at the last minute or something? And don't even try with that logic that, oh, she and the Diamonds had already left. This is a fantasy sequence. None of this is real. Where would they have gotten the suits and stage from? It doesn't need to make sense. They're acknowledging the end of a musical. I want Spinel to be right up there too for her amazing performance. She deserves that standing ovation. Also, maybe the Diamonds. It'd be funny if they could only fit their legs in the shot.
Second, there's a suspicious lack of Looney Tunes jokes. They may have referenced Roadrunner at one point, but that's debatable when it could have easily been a Sonic reference as well. I mean, just think about it. Steven Universe is a Warner Bros. Property, and Warner Bros. Owns Looney Tunes. Spinel's whole thing is that she's an old cartoon. I think that would be a great source of inspiration for her visual gags. I don't know what's up with it. I don't know if it's a copyright thing, but if she can reference properties that the company doesn't own, then I don't see why she can't reference a property that they're famous for. As I said in my first point, if they didn't want to put her on stage, why can't she just have her own "that's all folks" moment at the end? I know it's not a big deal, it just feels like wasted potential. The next big thing is her relationship with the Diamonds. I don't mind the solution of leaving her with them, given the circumstances. It makes sense. My problem with it is that they never address where this could go wrong. It's obvious from the get-go that they only took her in as the next best option when Steven wasn't available. They know that she was made for Pink Diamond, having similar playful qualities in the same color as her, and they only take interest in her because of that association. If she were anyone else, they wouldn't have a reason to care about her, and they aren't exactly healthy friendship material either way. The Diamonds do seem to be working on themselves, even if they're mostly doing it for Steven's approval, but I don't know if former fascist dictators are going to be the best people to leave a vulnerable, neglected gem with. These are the same people who neglected and abused Pink Diamond, leading to the circumstances where Pink would in turn abandon Spinel, and now they're using Spinel as a replacement for the very person who ruined her life. When Steven goes to the palace looking for help, it's clear that their ideas of therapy are not very helpful. The only one of the three that seemed even remotely useful was Blue Diamond's cloud room, but I think they're just smoking stuff in there. So yeah, Spinel may seem happy now, but I don't see this as a great long-term arrangement. I'm not super trusting of the Diamonds, and I'm not sure how long Spinel will enjoy being treated like Pink, or even worse, just a former possession of hers. I'm sure the writers have their own opinions on this, and I'm not saying they need to make her leave, just that I want some sort of acknowledgement on this glaring issue. Another thing I'd like to see is Spinel tying up loose ends with Steven. It's clear that she has a lot of admiration and respect for him, but it goes mostly unspoken in the movie. She was too ashamed to even bother in the moment, but sometime later in Homeworld Bound she's past those feelings and eager to try again. It was just unfortunate timing that when they finally crossed paths, Steven was now the one in the midst of a mental health crisis. I find this reversal very interesting, and it pains me that the show never touches on their shared anxieties about people drifting away. The problems that Steven are having right now are comparable to what Spinel was going through, but there wasn't enough time left in the series to expand upon that connection. The The writers do make an attempt to bring that up when Steven asks Spinel, "You used to have vengeful thoughts. How did you make them stop?" But they never go deep enough to acknowledge the cause of their similar outbursts. I feel bad for Spinel seeing how excited she got. I'm sure she's been waiting on this moment for a while, and it sucks that it went so poorly. I think it was mature of her to leave him be, and that could very well turn into its own message about letting people go who aren't interested. But it doesn't seem like it was meant to be that message, just more like nobody knew what to do with her in the epilogue. There are some interesting ideas you could explore between the two, and I hope that if they ever do share the screen again, that they'll be addressed. But if not, I'd like to see more of Spinel's personal growth, learning to accept this lack of closure for a second time, but now responding more appropriately compared to how it went with Pink. Following that, I think Spinel needs to interact with more characters in general. The deepest connections we ever see her have are with Steven and what was implied with Pink. Even after she's been taken in by the diamonds, their relationship doesn't seem any deeper than it was at the end of the movie. I'd like to see either an exploration of these relationships, or have her branch out to meet other characters. I know the fandom was interested in the hypothetical interactions she could have with Pink's other Pearl, Volleyball, especially seeing how Spinel was probably her replacement. I didn't pay much attention to that, and it seemed that the staff had more ideas about Pearl and Volleyball rather than Spinel and Volleyball, but looking at it now, I do see something interesting. One thing being how their trauma with Pink wound up manifesting in their physical forms. I don't really know what I do with them outside of the shared trauma. I didn't pay much attention to Volleyball or the fandom's take on her, but I know that you guys have a lot of ideas and a lot of fanfiction. One of the few AUs I ever paid attention to was when somebody drew them as the Mask, like the Jim Carrey movie. That was pretty rad. I liked that a lot. But yeah, stuff like that is cool. Y'all are cooking with gas. I see what they mean with those characters, and I hope that Spinel can interact with more people and have deeper relationships if she ever returns. My last few issues are smaller ones, nothing significant, so I'm just nitpicking at this point. I feel like the audience isn't given a chance to fathom just how long 6,000 years actually is. It's only something I try to imagine after watching the movie, because when you hear it out loud, it's kind of just a big number. We can see that time was passing and we can see the effect that it had on her, but it doesn't immediately convey the horror of being isolated for that long. Just a few days of solitary confinement could be considered inhumane, but then turn those days into weeks, then months, then years, then centuries, then millennia. And that's the kind of torture she was going through. I think it hits a lot harder when you rewatch the show from the beginning and keep in mind that during every single episode you're seeing, she's still standing there, waiting. I don't know what the writers could do with that. They don't really need to address it. I just think it'd be interesting to put that sheer amount of time into perspective. Another nitpick is that the injector was way too easy to deal with. They played it up like it had the potential to end the world if it kept draining, but then it actually did empty out all the poison, and other than trashing the city, the Earth still seemed perfectly fine. The damage wasn't even that difficult to fix. It seemed like they repaired it all in just a few months, and at this point, I don't think the city's particularly fazed by these evil gem shenanigans. I think this is just a consequence of the injector being added on later. It was never meant to be the focus of the story, and as I've explained before, it mostly serves as symbolism for Spinel's behavior. Despite this, it still feels like a very weak and pointless threat on its own. I don't really buy that it's some world-ending device, and in my attempts to fill this plot hole, I've had my own, probably very incorrect, ideas about it. The first thing is that I wonder where she even got it from, and why it happened to have the same heart shape as her gem. It shows a lot of resemblance to the drills used for the kindergartens, and I think that whatever it is, Spinel probably got it from her own kindergarten. It's a whole other plot hole guessing where she acquired her weapons from, but I think she could have remembered her birthplace and just took the equipment left behind. Now, the more insane theory I have about this is that this is the same kindergarten drill that they used to make gems with. Maybe I missed something, but I don't recall any drills being used only to destroy the planet. That's just a byproduct of the process to make new gems. I don't see why they'd make a device to simply destroy the planet when they need its nutrients to keep the kindergartens running. With all of that in mind, I feel like the reason why the injector was so underwhelming was because that wasn't even the beginning of what it could do. Imagine that a few months or years later, the city has a sudden infestation of Spinels. I'm guessing it'd be Spinels, if anything, but I had a short comic a few years ago where I thought it'd be a diamond or something. I don't know. I'm pretty sure it's just plot holes. I doubt anyone was thinking that far ahead. This was a much more delusional take, but if I'm right, sucks for Spinel. That child support's gotta be crazy. Additionally, I don't know if this is anything, but in the background of the garden, you can see that there's a little planet in the distance full of holes, one of which looks a bit heart-shaped. If she did stop by her kindergarten to get that stuff, then I wouldn't be surprised if this is the planet that she came from.
Side note to this, someone claimed that the reason Spinel had access to these weapons was because Pink let her see her private inventory and Spinel remembered where it was, but this is taking the word of an unsighted Tumblr post, so I don't know for certain. Still, Spinel had to have been made somehow, and I'm not going to rule out the injector being related to her or her type of gem. Anyway, that's the last of my ramblings. I don't know how to end a video. If you found any of that entertaining, let me know. I could always make more of these. If you haven't checked out my other work, such as MOTLEY'S Mathhouse, then please do. I'd appreciate it. With that being said, I'm all out of words now. Goodbye.